You linked this in the chat the other day. I haven't had a chance to look at this yet, but what exactly is this Psychonauts documentary about?
So
obviously Psychonauts.
Yes, it is about the development of Psychonauts 2. So for the 6 years it took them to make Psychonauts 2, the entire time they had a documentary crew with them documenting the day-by-day process of making this video game. And they just released this week that documentary. It is 32 parts long. I believe it comes out to about 22 hours in total to watch all of it. It is a hefty piece of video game documentary work. I have watched all of it. I watched all of it in like 4 days. As a person who hasn't even played Psychonauts either, so I don't even have like the intrigue of being like, ooh, I get to see how the game I played was made. I'm like, ooh, a deep dive into video game development, something that's generally kind of kept close to the chest in ways that we don't really understand. And as you watch this documentary, you understand why they keep it close to the chest, because all these people seemed miserable. This development seemed like hell, and it was absolute torture. It's such an interesting behind the scenes look at making a major game, like a real big game that has like expectations behind it and a thing people expect Psychonauts to be, which is a thing that they focus it on a lot. It's like, is this psychonautical, which is one of those vague loose terms that you kind of know it when you see it, but when you're making a game you can't be like, yes, the famous psychonautical principle, we shall narrow down on that, which is ultimately why the game took 6 years. But it's so interesting to watch. Like, it starts out, so Tim Schafer's like, we're making Psychonauts 2 and I don't want to like lead the project. I'll kind of stand to the side, I'll write the project, and then I'll kind of meddle a little bit. And then some other guy, Zach McClendon, who they brought in, who was worked on BioShock and he worked in some other games. He was the project lead. And so the first like 3 years of the project are like a weird, not quite power struggle, but like Zach is kind of like the stepdad of the game. And Tim Schafer is like he's the Psychonauts guy. So the whole time, like, the team are they're always kind of looking to Tim, even though Tim's not the project lead, but they're still always looking to Tim. And you can see like communication breakdown between this team over the course of like 3 or 4 years, to the point where Zach McClendon ends up leaving the project. And just seeing that happen over time, where like they're just flying the wall during meetings, getting reaction shots to the project lead like shooting down somebody's idea, and then you can see like the heartbreak in the eyes of the person he shot down. And then the next scene is like, that person then left the studio. And like, you can see it's obviously it's a documentary. They do build narratives, but you can see that kind of stuff happen in real time, and you can see the communication breakdown in real time, and you can see everything like that's both good and bad about video games. You can see like the tension between art and design and production and engineering. You can see how all the meetings leave people just utterly exhausted because it's death by meetings. You can see like management styles, and you can see how people get burned out in the middle of a project when they've been working on it for 3 years. It still looks like shit and doesn't feel any good to play, and everyone gets like super demoralized and starts like going for each other's throats. And like it comes out fine. They release a game everybody loves. Everybody's happy by the time they get all the way through this process, all the way through to 2021. And then there's also like the little undercurrent of it, of during this period, Double Fine was bought by Microsoft. How did that change the project? During this period, COVID happened. How did that affect this project? So I think it's not quite warts and all, because there's some stuff they very clearly don't cover and they do leave out, and you're like nibbling at the edges of some of the stories that happened during development, the kind of the deeper and more personal stuff that I'd imagine they didn't want to air out in public. So it's not quite everything you would have wanted, because there is some stuff it's like, what really did happen there? Like when the project lead leaves, you kind of see the ramp up to him leaving, but they don't actually really talk about the moment of him leaving and why he left and what they're going to do afterward that much, because they just want to move on from that. And it's one of the most interesting things I've watched in a very long time. As I said, just to get that fly in the wall perspective of game development, which is a thing people just don't understand how it works, me included. Like, people like game development is this, like, you understand how a film is made. It's like people stand at a set and they shoot it and then they edit it and it's a film. It's not like a difficult thing to comprehend. Whereas video games are this weird mix of art and then science, because you have like all the technical machinery behind it and all the programming. And you don't really understand how those two things come together until you see people do it over the course of 6 years. And you will get so much sympathy for why like games ship in the state they do, that even after 6 years, like this game, when they put it out the door, they're like, we know about like 100 bugs in this game that we just don't have the time to fix. Because this game had an original release date of 2018. It's now 2021, and a whole different publisher later, it has to go out the door. Like, because they were originally being published by Starbreeze, and then Starbreeze went into some weird crime shit, and then obviously Microsoft bought them. And like, you see even the stress on Tim Schafer, like the money stuff, where it's like, this game isn't where we want it to be. But where we are with the money we have at the moment, it has to get out. And then like Microsoft buy them, and that gives them more time. And then COVID weirdly gives them more time, because they were meant to release, I think, in the summer of 2020. And then they got an extra year, but then that extra year was full of like strife. And you could see like the physical toll COVID took on all those people as they were trying to finish out this game and get to the finish line. I don't know, all of that stuff. It's just so fascinating to watch. As I said, it's the most interesting thing I've watched in a long time. But the fact that I blitzed through 22 hours of it over the course of 4 days tells you that I wanted to watch a lot. Because this isn't their first documentary. They made a documentary about Broken Age as well, Double Fine Adventure, which I haven't watched, but I think I will after this. I think that development was a little smoother, because like 3D platformers are so hard. I don't know if you know that, guys. Like the iteration of the levels you see go through in this documentary, of where they start out as really kind of boring, and then they're like, how do we make this Psychonauts? And then they try and do that, and that doesn't work either. And they reboot a lot of the levels in this game 3 or 4 times until they finally get to the idea, the thing that makes it Psychonauts, and not just a generic 3D platform level. And like that process exhausted those human beings. Like you really see the physical cost this game took on those human beings over the course of 6 years.
Well, that's the thing, because, you know, if you get to the point where you decide, okay, we need to just completely overhaul this level, you could be looking at minimum 3 months worth of work that you either have had to break. I mean, it could be even longer, but at least to get up to where you was before, you're looking anywhere from 3 to 6 months. But you might have like the framework of some of the programming is probably in there, but in terms of like the art assets, the level design, the feel of it, to start all over that kind of process and to have to do it several times is just the stuff of nightmares. And, you know, like I'm in the process of making my first game at the moment, and it's just me and one other person. And I've had people say to me, like, how would you feel about wanting to work in like a bigger team or on like a AAA game? And I was like, honestly, it sounds like hell. It sounds like the worst fucking thing known to man, because you're such a tiny like part of this kind of bigger machine. And, you know, as you point out, this thing took 6 years to make. And that just the idea of working on one thing for 6 years, and obviously there are different aspects to that you work along the way, but I just couldn't do it. It would drive me up the wall. So I definitely want to, I doubt I would be able to watch all of this, but I definitely want to kind of dive into some of this and see. And, you know, these sorts of like biographies, I mean, one of the most interesting documentaries of this nature, it's not video game related, but the Metallica documentary they had for St. Anger, where they were all just a bunch of petty, like post-alcoholic, just the worst fucking middle-aged men you've ever seen in your life, going through the process of making a bad album. It is fascinating.
Some kind of monster, by the way, is what that was called, and it's brilliant.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting contrast to this, because I don't think anybody, when you watch this documentary, ever goes into like making Psychonauts in bad faith. Like, that's what's the kind of crushing part of it. It's like everybody goes into making this game super duper excited. They really want to work and make a good Psychonauts game, and it just breaks them over the course of 6 years. And it's like, it's not the case that like they went in there being like, oh, let's fight with that person. It's just like over the course of that process, it just breaks people down. And you mentioned like the size of the studio and the size of the team. Like, I think it's 60 or 70 people made this game, or at least for most of the project. They dragged on some more teams toward the end to get it over the line. And when you think like that's a lot of people, but then you think about how like the average Ubisoft game is made by thousands in like multiple countries across the world. They have all these studios all over the place, some of which are working on art, some of which are working on design, some are coding, some are like bits and bobs, are all flooded into this game from like thousands of employees across probably dozens of countries. And you just think, if it's this bad for 60 people in the same building, how do they do it for like thousands of people spread across the world? How can you coordinate that? It's insane to even think about.
Yeah. Like it's bad enough, back in the day when me and Jack were in a band and trying to construct a song, like a 3-minute song between 4 people in the same room, that in itself could become quite a contentious thing to kind of like negotiate sometimes. But as you mentioned, 60 plus people, 100 plus people, thousands of people, the coordination that has to go into bringing all of these things between the overall kind of like vision of what the project is, the visual style, the programming, the programming which is split into multiple layers between technical art, just the actual like science of how the engine works, the animation, the composition, everything, to bring that all together. It is a miracle that any game ever gets made because of how much has to go into it. And I can't remember what came out last year, but there was like a backlash from developers who got I can't remember. I feel like it was like an innocuous tweet from some clown, and a bunch of developers came out and were showing off like not even like early prototypes of their games, but games that were well into development, and how unfinished they still looked, because it's like, look, this game doesn't look like the game that you see until right up until the deadline, because so much of the game is just about getting the feel for it long before you even kind of worry about like the assets and the animation, that sort of stuff. And it's just, and it's something that I'm going to see firsthand myself, no doubt, over the next like 12 to 18 months. Getting all that stuff tied together and out the door. It's why anyone does this. It's kind of like baffling sometimes. And the other thing as well, and we'll never find this out, I'm so fascinated about what Microsoft's return on investment for this was, because it was out on Game Pass. So like, where is the money that Microsoft make back from this fucking thing? None of us will ever know.
The PS4 game sales.
Yes, all 3 of them.
Yeah, but it's the time and money of it all as well, yeah. Or it's like, if you had told these people in 2015, it's like, actually guys, you're going to have 6 years to make this. Like, that would have relieved so much pressure on these human beings if they had known then they have 6 years to make the game. As opposed to, like, obviously, original release date 2018. I think it slipped to 2019 even before they thought, like, all right, this is our hard release date. And there's periods in that time where they're like, we have to get something. Like, this doesn't feel good. We don't really like it. It's not, again, what they call psychonautical. It doesn't feel like Psychonauts. It doesn't feel like the true successor to the first game. But we are reaching the stage where, like, time and money is running out. So we have to get something we can at least be either proud of or finish and put it out. And that pressure on those people, it's so unfair. There's no alternative to it, and like there's a very honest discussions about crunch in video games coming in this documentary. Ones that like might be cancelable, I'd say, if the wrong people watched it. But you get like very honest, like, if we have this much time and this much money, in order to make something we can be proud of, we have to put too much time into it. And like, a lot of these people are artists. They're not like, this isn't a job to them; it's art to them, and they don't want to put out something they're not proud of. And that's where a lot of the crunch comes from, because time and money. And like, there's no excuse for big studios for that, I don't think. Like, if you're a Nintendo, you can just say, lads, take another 4 months, take another 3 months, take another 5 months, we'll fill in the gap. Same if you're like a 2K with any of their big games, and like we're the same if you're a Rockstar. It's like, you can still live off the GTA Online money. You do not need to crunch these people, just take more time. But if you're a Double Fine, before they were bought by Microsoft, like, you're living and dying by each release. If you don't get something out the door, you're going to go broke. The money's going to run out. And that pressure is on these people at all times until they're bought by Microsoft, and then there's like a whole different set of pressures. But yeah, it's essential. Double Fine of Psych Odyssey. There's 32 episodes of it on YouTube, free for everybody to watch. Essential watching. If you even like, I didn't play Psychonauts, so I don't even have like an investment in the behind the scenes of a game I like. It's just it's a fundamentally important story for video games. I think go watch it. It's phenomenal.
Well, look, it was Link to the Cast Game of the Year 2021, so I'd say it was all worth it in the end.
Suck it, Jack. Suck it.
Do you know what? I'd actually really enjoyed listening to Garrett talk about that so long that I forgot that he did that as a act of violence towards me in the first place. Do you know what? I think I'd watch that. Just because I think all of the stuff you like elucidated there about game development sounds really interesting to me. So even with no, you know, and at the end of the day, I did say at some point I might play Psychonauts 2, but I just seeing behind it, like I really love Danny O'Dwyer's no-clip documentaries, and they only give you kind of a small window, but 32 episodes, how much content is that in hours, Garrett?
It's about, I think, 22. Most of the episodes are like in and around half an hour. There are a few shorter. They're a good bunch longer. Like, it's very good background noise if you're like working during the day and want to throw something on a TV next to you. It's great to watch that way, where it's like you can be the fly on the wall, just kind of glancing. It's like, oh, things are going disastrously for them. Oh, that meeting which the team lead thought went really well. You could see the look on the faces of his team did not go really well.
I see.
And that's like the thing as well, because there aren't really a lot of these types of, I guess, internal documentaries, if you want to call them, because as you know, Jack mentions, like NoClip have done a really good job over the last couple of years of doing these sort of like post-mortem style documentaries with studios on their games and whatnot. But outside of that, like one of the new things that's coming out with a lot of like smaller developers, and a lot of them are doing it purely just to build a backing and visibility for their game. You're seeing a lot of developers do dev blogs or vlogs on YouTube about the game that they're in the process of making. But that's still a very different kind of vibe or environment to this thing. And, you know, it's very rare that you're going to see this sort of thing, just because, you know, as kind of you say there, Garrett, like the sorts of things that can come out in these types of things, and the sensitive nature of topics around stuff like crunch and just the general business dealings, like it is very rare that you're ever going to see this sort of thing. So, you know, fair play to Double Fine for putting this out.
Yeah, and usually stuff like this is presented as marketing. You know, it's like,
oh, absolutely.
You get a little behind the scene glimpse. I look at us placing the assets. Isn't that cool? Whereas this, as I said, it's not quite everything you could possibly want. You will have some questions like, oh, how did that really go down as you watch it? But it's like 90% of everything you could possibly want to see. Like, what is the actual process behind making a game like this? And you will, again, you get a much greater understanding for why both games get ship broken these days and why games are breaking people and they're super duper burned out. Because the first episode of it is actually mostly covering the development of Psychonauts 1, because they have a bunch of footage of that too, because apparently Tim Schafer loves filming his developments. As I said, they did one for Broken Age as well. So you see, like that, the same thing happened on the first Psychonauts, where it's like, oh, struggling with publishers, struggling with time, struggling with money. Microsoft bailed them out. Microsoft dropped the deal. They found a different publisher. All that stuff happened with the first game too. And like all the developers, a bunch of which are still with Double Fine working on Psychonauts 2, they were all like, never again. We can't let a development like that happen here again. And then it kind of did. So like they all went in with the most noble of intentions. Like, we're going to make a game. We're going to make it the right way. It's going to be great. We're all going to have a good time. We're going to learn from the first time. And they kind of didn't, because making games is exceptionally hard.
Yeah, I'm sure it is.
It goes back when people go developers lazy, all that stuff. It's like, it nearly always comes down to time and money, because these people have pride in their work. I don't think it's really ever the case that's like, oh, the artist didn't put more here because they didn't want to. You know, they're just like, ship it, who cares? Yeah. It's nearly always the case that's like, you have X amount of time to churn this out, do it. And they're like, well, what can we do? And they do what they can.